Hi everyone. How are you doing this week? So let me just go check over here if I can hear myself. Yeah, okay, I can hear myself, and that is working. Great. Okay, so let's take a look. So I see here Adriana is here, and Sarah. Hey, hi Sarah. And let's see what Adriana has to say. So just focusing on one thing at a time, studying in college. And okay, yeah. And yeah, how are things going for you, Sarah? And okay. And yeah, so this week, this is the second week that my children have been on vacation, so you might hear them in the background. And it's getting a little bit more challenging to juggle everything, knowing that I might have to separate an argument or a fight over a toy or who's watching TV or so it's I do miss a little bit when they were at school and I could just focus on the barking dogs next door with the teaching, but pretty soon we're going to be moving about a month from now, so there won't be the dogs next door, the school next door, the busy avenue, the planes flying overhead. So this city is rather noisy, but that's just what it is. So one thing that I've been starting to work on with students this past week or two has been, in addition to the speaking challenge, has been adapting this to a more specific version of it for the TOEFL, the exam. But at the same time, I do have a student who is working on the medical licensing examination, and that student also needs to be working on intonation, sounding natural in the process for the rapport between a doctor and a patient. I know that several students for the TOEFL exam that need a certain way of speaking, a 26 on that, those are usually also looking for licensing. So pharmaceutical licensing, chiropractors, people in the physical therapy, nursing, dentists. So there are many professionals in the medical field who do need to be working on how they sound. And I have a few students who are with that mindset that they need to be working on their speaking, either for that TOEFL or they've are working on these speaking exams. So I'm starting to take more and more notes in a more rigorous way to see what goes into sounding natural, what goes into the pronunciation, goes into the what information is being conveyed with the voice when it's effective, and also what happens when it's a monotone, flat intonation. So those are a few things that I've been looking into. I hope to launch a new program, like a 4-week program by August 1st. So right now I'm collecting a lot of this information. I also have a student who is an airline pilot, and I've seen that there's a speaking exam as well, and that there is an international kind of for the aviation communication to make sure that the communication goes like clearly, smoothly. So I do have more and more students who are need to work on their English at a higher level for the communication purposes. So that's what I hope to be putting into this program in the near future, in this next week or two, to get that launched, in addition to the speaking challenge as we organize it as well. And I just want to say here, hi, Carol. And so, yeah, received your messages, and definitely looking forward to seeing you soon at the Langfest conference. So that's definitely going to be coming up soon. I need to be finishing my presentation. I think a lot of these insights that I'm also talking about for this program are probably going into equally of the things I want to say to include a little bit in the presentation of like, why practice speaking? What is the importance of speaking? Why do we all struggle with speaking so much? Why is that not just some light switch that you can just turn on and off, like you might be able to do with a grammar point in writing or reading and understanding something? So, yeah, the why, yeah, the raison d'être for the speaking challenge, I think, is something I want to convey, that importance of speaking practice and being able to communicate with people effectively, naturally, spontaneously. So those are a few things that I'm looking into as well for the upcoming presentation. I'll probably be sharing little bits and pieces in the next few weeks as we get closer. Maybe I try to explain some concept and see if that made sense, and if it didn't, then I need to fix it. But I'm really looking forward to the conference, and also looking forward to meeting several people who I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting in person. There's at least one or two people who I have interviewed, and I know Maria Ortega. She was one of the first people I had interviewed on my podcast like 3 years ago when it just got started. She was an online teacher who I was following on Twitter at the time. And I thought this idea of teaching online, teaching on Skype, I thought that was incredible. I'm like, how do you do this? How do you find students? How do you deal with, I don't know, getting paid and scheduling? And so she was one of the first people I had interviewed at that process. And at the time, 3 years ago, I was just really didn't know how to really get started. I think I joined Italki a few months in September or October. That'll be like 4 years now that I had joined Italki as a teacher there. However, my account as a teacher on Italki, it's gone dormant a bit because I've moved to another platform and also taken some lessons directly through my own website. So I know on Italki there right now they prefer to keep just active accounts for teachers available for scheduling. But that I got started with that, and then I got contacted to help out for teaching with a language kind of study abroad or making short trips. I got contacted to help provide lessons for those students in that community. And then that got split into, some of them want general English for conversation and travel, and then more and more wanted to take exam preparation lessons. And so that's really what my specialization has gotten into this last 3 years, is the exam preparation. And that's lots and lots of students from around the world who want to take the TOEFL exam. And I would say a lot of the speaking section of that exam, the making those short recordings like 45 seconds or 1 minute, has been the motivation for this speaking challenge, where I wanted to give students the opportunity to record themselves, get comfortable with the recordings, maybe not necessarily the stressful environment of 45 seconds or 60 seconds, but at least to develop an idea, expand that to multiple languages, not just for English. And I think that's where the speaking challenge has been evolving, where we do have a mix of English speakers learning other languages and lots of people from around the world wanting to learn English. So it's been an interesting community. I've joined 2 other challenges, and it felt a bit lopsided, where there was one really dominant group of the language. So I joined one challenge where it was just all Russian speakers, and so I felt a bit out of my comfort zone, because all the communication was in Russian. I had to adapt very quickly, and as I was trying to put phrases into Google Translate, it was just a bit too much. And then I went to join the Add One challenge, and then all the communication was in English. I felt like, oof, okay, I can understand what people are saying. But then it did feel like it was predominantly more English speakers learning a foreign language, and it didn't quite feel like there was enough people from other countries learning English to kind of help each other. And the speaking challenge has seemed to evolve in such a way where we have both. We do have we do still have a lot of people learning English, but we also have a lot of English speakers who can kind of help each other out, and creating these little like, okay, I help you, you help this person helps. There's still ways to continue to improve upon that process, and I'm always looking for ways to do that. And I really appreciate all of your insights, your feedback on what's working, what can be improved. So I also want to say here, hello, Sharif. Let me know any questions or things that are on your mind this week, or things that you've been noticing that have been working well this month. We're about halfway through July. And let me know things that you would like to try out in this next few weeks or next month. I'm thinking about for August, because I know around after the first week, when we collect and compile all the questions that everybody has, I haven't made like an entire compilation of several months of doing that exercise. So I'm thinking of like making a longer list of those questions, putting that on a separate Google document, and just say, not just in the day 8 email, but say, okay, here is this month's day 8, day 9 email, but here are the list of other questions that came up last month, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, since this has been a popular topic that we've been doing for several months now. So I'd like to go in and compile those questions and add them into a longer list, so people can kind of select from those as well. because I think it ends up being a really great way to kind of get everybody to interact with each other on there. So, also on my mind lately, I've been testing out, and I got a few comments here from Carol. I'll just read what Carol had said in the Facebook group about Duolingo. Just want to go here. Yeah. Because this has been an interesting conversation and observation about using the app. I had neglected it for several months, or actually a couple of years, actually. But my brother mentioned that he and his son were using it. One of his sons were using it to practice Spanish and French, and I decided, hey, why don't I try it out again and maybe see how far, if I can finish the tree in Russian, look into the dynamic for the daily practice or the exercises, or try to get my mindset into the how to build a streak, or the encouragement to keep going, or what are some of the things that are built into the app. But I realized the other day, after about 11, 12 days of doing it a little bit each day, and maybe a certain amount of minimal effort, and sometimes maybe a little bit longer effort, then that streak got broken, because on a Sunday, I just got, it was a busy day. And then by the time I looked at my phone, and it was like 11 o'clock at night or midnight, and I was like, oh, I forgot to do that. And that had broken that streak. On the other days, I had used this for a few minutes when I woke up, and maybe I was still in bed. Maybe maybe I was not using the microphone. Maybe I could, if I didn't want to make too much noise. But just looking at a comment I made of like, why is it so, I don't know, easier to keep a 11-day, 12-day streak on Duolingo versus in the speaking challenge? Kind of, I also struggle with my own schedule and activity, and maybe I'm making my recordings later at the end of the day, and it's not the right period, because maybe I'm just too tired. I should be doing this earlier in the day to get that done and get like that check. And Carol had some good observations here, saying that, yeah, Duolingo doesn't require original thinking, and she can maintain a streak easily on Duolingo. And you can turn off the microphone if you want. You can turn off the audio exercises if you don't want to make some noise or disturb somebody. And there are certain ways that you can kind of cheat on the app. You could go back and do a very easy exercise that would take 2 minutes versus like a harder exercise. But the exercises themselves are not really as intensive. It's mostly tapping on the buttons. You don't necessarily have to write all of that out. So that difficulty level, it's a little bit on the lower side there. And yeah, you can go in spurts and just do it for fun. And she says here as well, the real reason it's easier that it requires little thought other than the basic word knowledge and little grammar. And the lessons are targeted, so you know what to expect, and you don't have to think too much on a topic or develop something to say, and perhaps get extra vocabulary. You're just answering a few questions, maybe speaking to the microphone a little bit, but it is a useful app, but in that limited sense. And I guess the speaking challenge is a much like jumping into the deep end of the language, where you do have to think about something to say on a topic. The topics might have a varying level of difficulty. You may need to look up some new vocabulary words. You can't just plug in a few words and say a few sentences. You can adapt it, but to get as much out of it, it's a bit more, it's more intensive, what we're doing here. If you can maintain the routine, if you can find a way that works for you and you can stay active, then the program does help. But there's so many things going on for everybody, busy lifestyles, busy schedules, difficulty level of the questions, maybe not liking or being inspired by a particular question. There's just a lot of variables that go into the practice and maybe not knowing what to expect. I mean, I might give you a day or two a warning of what we might expect coming up. There might be a development of an idea, or maybe I'm reacting to things that you guys have said. So it is living and breathing. It isn't just a automated list of topics that are unrelated. There sometimes something's going on in the month. Just wants to say also hi to Marie, and working while listening, but I'll try to interact as well. So yeah, great to have you join as well here. So any other observations, thoughts about Duolingo or some of these other apps, things that you would like to get my opinion on if I haven't tested it, or there was an app that came, there was an advertisement that came up on YouTube, Fluent U. I haven't tried that one out, but if you guys have tried it, I'd like to get your insights, your feedback on that. So I'm always looking for other ideas here on what works, what doesn't on some of these apps. And as I've mentioned in one of the emails, I'd like to create my own speaking challenge app that would help encourage you to work on the speaking, and trying to integrate things that are working from what works here, what works there, and trying to also figure out those limitations of why does something not work and what does that reveal. So for example, if we mention that, okay, Duolingo is great on the lower beginning side of the language, what limits it from the intermediate to advanced part? So I'm not exactly that I want to give business advice to Duolingo, like, hey, how could you make this better for the intermediate advanced level, but try to figure out, okay, is there a gap in the market for something that's being overlooked, or that does require a little bit more human input, or can't just be automated 100%. And Marie says here, yeah, I do use Duolingo. Problem is that it gets boring after some time, and the phrases are not really natural, but at least the repetition helps to learn new vocabulary effectively. Yeah, some of those phrases, I just did a history or a fantasy history exercise. I don't really see myself interacting with knights and swords and wizards, and that really doesn't come up into my daily life. So I don't really know how useful that's going to be. Or I think I joked about when I was testing Duolingo out a couple years ago and saying, like, the knife is in my boot. I can say that in Italian. I can say, yeah, il coltello. I know the knife part, but that could really get me in trouble at customs if I practice saying, yes, the knife is in my boot. I don't want to get arrested for carrying a weapon or something. But so yeah, some of those phrases you can practice with the vocabulary, but you might not necessarily use those words. There is there's a Twitter handle. I don't want to say it out loud. I can type this, but there's that Duo says and there's people taking screenshots of these weird, strange phrases, or that are in the algorithms that get put into some of the exercises when the words are kind of scrambled there. That's kind of a place for like a laugh of almost looking at those conversations on the autocorrect, where autocorrect creates a very awkward conversation. It's almost along the lines of that kind of stuff. Carol says, I think Memrise is very good too, but also the quality is very erratic. Depending on which course you choose, I think it's hard to choose a course without knowing what it's going to be like. Yeah, Memrise, yeah, you can have a popular course that a lot of people are joining, but sometimes when you want to create the course, it's very limiting. You can only create a certain kind of exercises in there. So it might be word and its definition in the word, maybe translation, maybe identifying maybe a picture and an image, picture and a word. There is some audio recognition as well. But when I got a chance to program my own stuff, I thought there was a lot more flexibility where I could decide what kind of an exercise I wanted to create. I felt like for Memrise, I had to manually create a list of, if I wanted to do this and this, I had to program that. Whereas in my own programming and my own variables, I could just leave it all, I could leave it random. I could let the program kind of just jump around very flexibly. And on Memrise, it felt like I had to manually go in and make that happen. And it just felt like that was going to be very tedious for creating a very interactive course. Carol says, I haven't used Fluent U to read a number of their articles about, language learning. Sharif, what does a false beginner mean? False beginner. I feel that when I started French after 2 years of Spanish, I was a false beginner in French because I actually had a lot of language background and concepts that were familiar. So it didn't feel like I was learning from scratch. So that's kind of how I interpret like a false beginner. You're not completely starting from scratch. You have an advantage. You're not completely, it's not all brand new. A false beginner could also be when the language has been abandoned for a while, like 6 months or a year, and then you come back to it and you join a beginner's course, even though you may have taken like 3 months of a beginner's course, and then you go back 9 months later, take the beginner's course from the start again, and you're kind of refreshing what you've learned. It's not completely from scratch. And what else on here? So that's more the language education study and not using the apps. Just the Instagram stories, YouTube lives. Okay. For the not starting from zero. Even though you might forget everything. Language bubble. Yeah, that's an interesting concept as well, of creating an environment that is stimulating and that's getting you to interact with the language, even though you might not be directly living in that culture. I have a blog post about that concept where I invited several language teachers and language learners who I know were living abroad, and then other ones who were living at home. And we just kind of debated this, or each person had their idea about what is that experience? And I think personally, I've had direct access in Paris and a really good experience there. But I was studying at the university. I was working with business students. I had to do a lot of business communication, emails, and help people translate documents from French to English and getting asked how to explain something from English to French. So I had to go back and forth with language very, very on a daily basis. I had friends, I had neighbors, I had people who I was in contact with from all walks of life. I had students who were kids working in schools. So I was exposed to all ages, many different backgrounds. And in Mexico, I just feel that a lot of that has been just a lot more isolated. Like these last 3 years of teaching online and being at home most of the day, me practicing Spanish, that's been much, much more limited. And these last 3 years, I feel like my Spanish is like stagnating. It's strange. I've been here for 10, 11 years, but because I've been speaking English so heavily on a daily basis, my Spanish is starting to slip a little bit. So, and at the same time that my Spanish is slipping, my Russian is improving because I've been interacting with people online, sharing recordings, making YouTube videos, maybe taking some lessons, using some of these apps. So I've created a language bubble for Russian. And despite the fact of like living in a country and then interacting with people, that's a good combination. Living in a country just by itself, but not interacting with people, that's not enough to be working on the language. And it is possible to be living at home and studying another language through speaking, reading, listening, reading, writing. You can do little exercises for each one of those skills, and maybe not even like, but the speaking challenge, not even necessarily having a speaking partner, but that it's better to have a combination of everything. So, and another comment here from Carol. A lot of people don't like Duolingo because of these odd sentences. However, if you look closely, even the crazy ones illustrate something. Yeah, the grammatical aspect. And Fluent U, Mari asking if that exists in other languages. I haven't tried it. I'm not sure. And I use the computer to work, so I get tired of the screens. Yeah, Adriana's saying that, and so it's interact with people. Yeah, I definitely agree as well. And Babbel, Carol asking if people have used that one. Not used it enough. I think I should use it more. It offers options for reading, listening. Yeah, I haven't tried that one. So I think the speaking challenge got mentioned in a Facebook group I think I joined a group for Babbel. Because somebody who had joined the speaking challenge had mentioned that they heard about it there. So I went and tried to go sign up and check that out to see what people are saying about the app. But yeah, it would be good to get some feedback on what people are saying about what works for that as well. I think ultimately with these apps, it's also the creating a routine that works for you, and maybe recognizing what works well on this app, what works well on that one, and trying to create your own a little bit of a mix of I like this for this and I like that for that, to see where you should focus your attention. Because I think any of these apps, they're not going to be perfect for everything. There's usually something where it's good for this purpose more than another one. So yeah, when I'm testing some of these apps, I'm not quite looking out for a like all-in-one. for every aspect of the language. So, and if I was going to build something as well, I think I would not go into it hoping to have it do everything. I think I would just focus on the speaking aspect, and what things would be beneficial for speaking. How would that help people become better speakers? Because the speaking aspect seems to be usually the most like under practiced aspect of the language learning. Or there's the speaking practice, but maybe not enough feedback or guided feedback to know what should I do next. Because I had some of the observations we get about not having feedback is then, how do I know if I'm going on the right track? How do I know if I'm heading in the right direction towards fluency? How do I know that I'm not just solidifying a mistake that's going to get harder and harder to break or fix later on, because nobody is telling me I'm saying it wrong? Sometimes those mistakes that people can understand you if you say it, even though there's probably a better way to say it. Some things I try to convince people to do is get comfortable with the concept of making a mistake, because some people are afraid of not wanting to make a mistake, and then using that as a way to stay in the comfort zone and not necessarily develop the confidence of, okay, I made a mistake, so what? I can still communicate, I can still make my point. So sometimes when students are approaching me and they want detailed feedback on every single mistake they're making, or they want to be interrupted almost for knowing that they made a mistake, I sometimes want to convince those people of like, make the mistakes. Just, I want to get you comfortable speaking more than being afraid of not being perfect. So I think some of that process is make the mistakes, keep making them, and work on the confidence to be comfortable with that speaking. And then when that comfort and that confidence is boosting, then go back and fix things. But I think sometimes the knowing that there are too many mistakes or lots of mistakes, sometimes that has an effect of being overwhelmed, in a sense of, well, I'm terrible. I'm never going to get better because I'm just making mistakes everywhere. And then not knowing which one to prioritize, which one is a higher priority mistake to fix versus something that's just people understand. It's a tiny thing. So finding the balance there on the feedback. So over the months and these past few years, it's been kind of a process of figuring out like how much feedback is helpful. No feedback might be that might discourage people, and then maybe too many mistakes of like a whole report on a 2-minute recording. So finding a balance there, but. And looking here, a few more of these comments. Yeah, Adriana, yeah, feedback is gold. Yeah, not being afraid to make mistakes, and yeah, we get ashamed, and then that makes us stop. So, yeah, the shame, the embarrassment, the anxiety, the stress. It's really important to get past those things. Maybe not necessarily loving mistakes, but just tolerating that. Because I think what I've heard from other things where people have a fear of something, or trying to find a remedy for something. Sometimes people say that these things they're not going to be eradicated. There's just learning coping mechanisms, finding ways to manage or cope or handle. Some things might not go away ever. And even listening to myself in English as a native speaker and teaching and speaking, I make mistakes. Sometimes I get tired. Sometimes my think is heading faster than I can speak. So my head is thinking faster than I can speak. So that wasn't on purpose, but that just proves the point that, yeah, sometimes you can just get tongue-tied when you're speaking, and it's not necessarily the end of the world. As I mentioned here with in the email about the breaking the streak on Duolingo, there's an option there, or not an option in the app, but the option that I have is, do I feel sorry for myself? Do I give up? Do I quit? Do I say language learning is never going to work for me? Or do I get back up again and start fresh and try to be do it better the next time? And I would say that the mistakes, it's not just I made a mistake, so the mistake is how I identify, how I identify, or how I judge my own value of oh, I made a mistake, so that means I'm a mistake. And it's no, that's something external. And my ability to learn a language, that's something different. So I think the mistake itself is not what people should be ashamed of or afraid of. I think it's what do you do after you make the mistake? How do you move on? What do you do with that? With that knowledge that you made a mistake, what do you do with that? Do you let that become an obstacle? Do you let that stop you from learning? Or do you turn that into a learning opportunity? Can you laugh it off? Can it become a funny anecdote that you think about years later? Or can you move on? So I think the real mistake is not learning from it, letting it become something that stops you from continuing. So that I think is part of the confidence, and that's definitely something I think I got used to in Paris, where I could kind of laugh at myself, or realize, yes, I have an accent, or I'm learning a foreign language, I'm not perfect, and just try to focus on communication more than a perfectly corrected sentence. Because I had another friend who seemed to be more obsessed with perfect pronunciation, perfect grammar. I mean, in his defense, he was teaching at a university, and he had an image to project. He wanted to not be made fun of for how he was speaking, because the students were expecting, I don't know, a professional or a knowledgeable teacher. But when it came time to having a normal conversation just with friends over coffee, he didn't know a lot of slang, and he didn't understand a lot of things people were just saying very simply. And I made a conscious effort at that point to I want to be able to defend myself with street French and understand street French and interact with people, and not be stuck in a formal French or book French. So yeah, part of that was getting comfortable making mistakes, and then also just being able to focus on communication. Just another comment here from Marie. So yeah, you can't improve without making mistakes. If you make mistakes, it means that you're trying and improving. If you don't try, don't practice, you won't make any mistake, but you won't improve it. Yeah, that's a very good, that's an excellent observation there. I'm going to have to copy that. I'm going to include that in the email, if you don't mind. I think that's a very good observation there. Um, and yeah, what you said about slang brings up something that bothered me. I know a lot of slang, but I am terrified of using it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Using slang. I think and anytime I'm also teaching things with English there. Thank you, Murray. So, uh, slang. I think my first mindset is understand it for, I don't know, self-defense, like being able to recognize when people are using slang, so your comprehension is not jeopardized by not being able to understand what people are saying. So understanding comprehension is like the first step. But later on, getting comfortable using it, that's usually a slow process of figuring out, like, did I use it right? Did I use it correctly? Am I using it with the right person in the right context? That gets a little harder to have all those little details on. So yeah, testing phrases out, testing new vocabulary, testing slang. That's the testing process that takes a bit longer to get some of the connotations and context details in that response. But understanding, I think, is the first step. But then it definitely takes a little bit while to get into the using it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the using it part is the harder part of slang. The recognizing it and understanding it, that's a little bit easier, but that doesn't quite translate from passive vocabulary to the active part. It's that active usage that, even if it were not slang, the active use usually requires testing it much more. And yeah, I do find it's helpful to read popular fiction and target language as common ways of expressions are used, and you can absorb them. Yeah, the figuring out where are you likely to find slang, if that would be movies, TV shows, popular fiction, popular nonfiction of kind of like magazines that have a target market of an audience that's maybe, I don't know, right now millennials or 20 somethings or something like that, and just finding the way they speak and they try to use that in their writing. For English, it's kind of like BuzzFeed. I know a couple teachers who recommend that for learning slang. I know checking from those sources, looking on Urban Dictionary for English to see how people are using that. But yeah, magazines, but more of these informal magazines. Those are, I'm trying to think of, like, I wouldn't look at like Science et Vie, like Science and Life, like that would be still informal French. That would not be so slang intensive, but it would be more of a formal standard usage of the language. But finding something in a like a teen magazine, or I'm thinking like a People magazine kind of a thing in French, if that was be more on a slightly kind of a gossipy context. Blog post, I think there's a lot of people who write about these kinds of things of blogging. That's a good place to find how people kind of think and speak. Stand-up comics, stand-up comedians, they throw a lot of slang into their act. So there's a couple there on that my wife has seen for a couple French YouTubers. Yeah, definitely vlogging, talking to the camera. Those are a few ways where, like, you could probably be watching me talk in English on these things right now if somebody's learning English as a foreign language, and see how do I just speak when I'm speaking and not necessarily on the slowing down and teaching aspects. So that can be for the pronunciation, the speed, the way I if I'm looking for what I want to say, like, yeah, you could definitely take some French YouTube videos and kind of listen to them a couple times. I doubt that they would have the closed captions. Sometimes the audio on YouTube it's improving a little bit, but you could definitely give a link to a video to somebody else who speaks French as a native speaker or an advanced learner and say, hey, what did this person say from this second to this, like these 10 seconds, what do they say? This is what I thought I heard, but what do you hear? And so somebody else could help you transcribe 10, 20 seconds of something. Or so if you get stuck on listening to what somebody said, you could definitely share a link to a video with somebody else, with a teacher or language partner. And oh yeah, remembering those phrases, expressions. Yeah, the remembering part. Again, that's the kind of activating some of the language there. Okay. Well, this has been about. I have a lesson starting. Actually, lesson starting 5 minutes ago. But I really like this discussion, and I appreciate a lot of you kind of being here and sharing your thoughts on these topics. But we will need to wrap up for today. Yeah, these are definitely topics that continuing to look into. The apps, the slang. Yeah, I think I will probably. Yeah. Also, looking forward as well. Can't wait to meet in Montreal in about a month's time from there. But yeah, I think I probably put in this slang concept in here. Figure out some questions that can go along with this for a topic. Just trying to figure out how we could include slang as a speaking topic. Or no, actually, there is an interesting exercise. I think my mother-in-law told me, because she's been teaching Spanish at a high school, and she did some exercises where everybody can seem to take something formal and make it slang, but it's usually not as easy to go from slang back to formal. And I think she was noticing that a lot of her students, high school students, were struggling with making their essays more formal or more standard. Because they were speaking in slang or thinking and speaking in slang, they didn't quite know how to make it more formal. So that could be an interesting exercise of taking a few phrases and seeing how many different registers could you juggle with a phrase of how could you make this phrase more formal, how could you make this phrase more slang. I'll think about that, but yeah, just see how we can and yeah, so Langfest, I think that one's just right now specific to Montreal. It used to be in New York for once, and then it got moved to Montreal, but it looks like it's going to be staying in Montreal. Yeah, as Carol mentioned here for this, but great. Okay, well, yeah, I do need to go for that next lesson, but wish all of you a great rest of the week, and continue your practice speaking and all the other skills here. But have a great yeah, rest of the week, rest of the month, and hopefully see you next week in another one of these calls. So take care. Have a great day. Talk to you guys soon.